Mesdames et messieurs, cher Raphaël, merci de cette introduction charmante et bienveillante. En effet, je me réjouis d'avoir l'occasion de vous adresser la parole ici même à Genève, dans cet espace magnifique d'HÄCHLER. L'honneur est d'autant plus grand lorsqu'on regarde la liste des intervenants. J'aurais moi-même aimé assister à plusieurs des conférences. Mon père, le sculpteur argovien Pierre HÄCHLER, ayant fait ses études aux Beaux-Arts de Genève tout d'abord, selon le vœu de son père, une année en architecture, ensuite 3 années en sculpture, cette ville occupe une place particulière dans ma biographie. Par la suite, Pierre HÄCHLER se rendait à Paris afin de poursuivre les études auprès de Germaine Richier, une des rares femmes sculpteurs de renommée internationale et collègue d'Alberto Giacometti. Vous voyez quelques images de Paris dans son atelier. C'est Germaine Richier qui a appris la méthode à analyser les formes de façon géométrique. On rendait ainsi en modelé ce qu'on voyait vraiment et non pas ce que l'on crut voir. Plus tard, il se tournait vers l'abstraction de la nature, jusqu'à ce qu'elle se soit vidée d'elle-même, comme il aimait à le préciser lui-même. Le minimalisme américain, qui émergeait dans les années 60 du siècle dernier, ne le satisfaisait guère, mais les structures primaires l'inspiraient dans son travail, dans lequel il s'efforçait d'accomplir avec des éléments de base simples quelque chose de plus complexe. En inversant ce processus, il retrouvait à travers l'abstraction des constellations qui, pour lui, faisaient sens. La découverte du fait que le géométrique peut également contenir des émotions et le doigt même devenait à partir de ce moment-là important. Ce qu'il gardait de la sculpture classique était la valeur importante qu'il attribuait à l'espace vide ou négatif, qui est constitué d'éléments différents. Une leçon importante pour chaque architecte et quelque chose qui m'a marqué dans mon parcours. Avec ma mère, également disciple de Germaine Richier, il vivait pendant 10 ans en Paris avant qu'ils investissaient l'argent de la vente de leur atelier parisien dans une maison qu'ils construisaient à Lansbourg en Argovie. L'architecte de la maison était un Genevois, Pierre Sicli. Lui, de son côté, avait passé 10 ans aux États-Unis et vivait alors à Zurich tout en restant un vrai Genevois. La maison qu'il dessinait ensemble avec mes parents et dans laquelle j'ai grandi m'a profondément marqué. Elle abrite l'esprit non conventionnel des années 60, l'être excentrique de Pierre Sicli et de celui de mes parents, consistant dans un mélange exquis, nourri également de la culture française et californienne. Cette maison, on voit le château de Lansbourg et à l'image de chambre à ça, qui est un peu moi comme enfant. La maison des parents de mon partenaire Andreas Fuhrmann, dont les 2 parents étaient architectes, est issue de la même époque et montre des parallèles intéressantes. Mais cela nous mènerait trop loin. Ceci en guise d'une brève introduction sur mes racines genevoises. J'en viens à ma conférence. Ayant été habitué ces dernières années à l'enseignement dans un cadre international, J'ai davantage l'habitude de parler plus en anglais, langue que j'utiliserai également pour cette conférence. Veuillez m'en excuser, je le regrette vraiment, ayant eu pendant toute mon enfance le français dans mes oreilles. So, I'm sorry, I have to continue in English. We were particularly pleased to hear that the subject to be discussed was voluptas. In Christian theology, voluptas is lust, one of the 7 deadly sins, where sensuous pleasures has wrongly been equated with sexual lust and demonized. This is one of the reasons why many people find it difficult to address the issue of sensuousness without a feeling of unease. A photo of Pipilotirist in our pavilion at the sea in Zurich. Without sensuousness in space, we would wither and become miserable. It is undoubtedly a source of cultural enrichment, but where does it originate from itself? Obviously, we can survive even in prison, but it is not a life of human dignity, and even less a fulfilling one. What is the correct dose of sensuousness to provide a feeling of comfort, but yet which neither overstrains the senses nor leaves them parched? This is a question that has long driven us, although unfortunately it would also seem to be a question that few architects ask themselves, otherwise their spatial interiors and urban exteriors would look different. Joseph Frank wrote in 1932, "What the purpose of a house is cannot be expressed in words. It's namely not there to cook, eat, work and sleep in, but rather to live in. Between the terms cooking, eating, sleeping, working and living is the thing we call architecture." The book cover When therefore does a house become architecture? 4 years ago we gave our first book the somewhat cryptic title, "What Anchors a House in Itself?" The enigmatic title, by the way, was inspired by a text by Kurt W. Foster, written for the book, and is in fact a question, namely, what anchors a house in itself without it being blind for its surroundings and its users. This blindness for the place and the people who use it is undoubtedly due to the functionalist vision of heroic modernism and the abnormal developments of technical process. What therefore should a house or an apartment achieve in order for it to not simply serve as an abode where everyday activities are undertaken? How does a building design have to be in order for it to enable an individual life plan, or even encourage such a life plan and not descend into simply being a place to lodge? In other words, what is architecture? After all, a huge question. Many things are constant in any building. We all build spaces that consist of floors, ceilings and walls, stairs and openings which offer protection and enable social livings. For this reason, architecture is also always a social act. After all, the task at hand is to create a feeling of being crowded in the world, a highly challenging task, and one which in the best case provides an existential foothold. Here the house we built together with Pipilotirist, where we also live in. I will show you also the pictures. This is the north side which is looking to the town, and the south side where we have actually the sun. This is the living room and the kitchen of Pipilotirist. She is a very passionate person to organize her life and make it colorful and sensual. This is what makes everyday matters so crucial, and the process of dealing with them so exciting and varied and never ever boring. The feeling of living in an era that continues drifts to change itself often robs us of any feeling of easing tranquility. The Japanese architect Katsuo Shinohara, who during his lifetime only built apartments and who described that building as the supreme discipline, wrote in 1970, "Does this strange feeling of restlessness one's experiences in contemporary conceptions of the apartment block not largely originate in the division between human emotion and social condition? One rarely experiences somewhere where a strong human feeling has been captured because all of the methods are centered on one aspect or another of social prosperity. Therefore, an ostentatious display of the client's financial prowess by no means automatically contributes to cultural or spiritual richness." This is the pavilion we built also at the Lake of Zurich. Images of our building can also have a sensual expression. And it is a pavilion really for the early life. It's really a lot of people there, if it is sunny. This is also a pavilion we could build at the Lake of Zurich. It was very interesting for us. The wall is very attractive for living, and this is for death. It's a cemetery building where people can go and meet their the lost, for the lost. And you see, it is also there is one room which is very colorful. From the outside, it has one room where it looks like a tent, and this is very gives you it has the expression of gravity. Inside, where the people, the lost, it's quite a cozy room. So we like to have this environment. The thing we are dealing with is the complexity of sensual simplicity, the task being to create it again and again anew. In this process, the terms nuance and ambivalence play an important role, and which indicate that architecture is not an exact science like mathematics, but has a lot to do with intuition and aesthetic understanding, which in turn have to be nurtured through education and experience. Mies van der Rohe once said, "The ideal dimensions of space cannot be calculated, space must be felt." For scale as calibrated to human existence is crucial, both in the small and the large, but it is equally decisive to have the ability to conceive three-dimensional spatial sequences that make sense in their hierarchy, are comfortable to progress through, and which in the last event are thought out like a film storyboard with moods of light, vistas, perspective, colors and textures. Often it is nuances that determine whether a building tips over into an unpleasant complementarity, or whether it harmoniously integrates itself without being servile. However, we ourselves also consider that it is equally important to have a closeness to life practicalities. This often injects an ambivalence into our designs and enriches them by opening them up to multiple interpretations, but without them sliding into randomness. Siegfried Gideon emphasizes the separation of thinking and feeling as a key problem in modernism. Long before Gideon, Nietzsche had already encapsulated this same relationship in the term Apollonian Dionysian. For him, the central concept of the modern was the ambiguity of values, the unifying of antitheses in a single principle, such as body and soul or nihilism, and the affirmation of life. We don't compulsively want to resolve the antagonism between reason and feeling in our architectural work, nor can we. But it fascinates us. In our architecture, we attempt to provide an alternative model, and we deliberately try to address it in our work by allowing ambivalence. Rationalists insist upon the primary of intellectual concepts, hypotheses and theories, countered by the empiricists' postulated dominance of perceptual experience, observations, sensory impressions, and the given. We ourselves are less interested in the purity of the one stance as opposed to the other. The key aspect is to amalgamate the two opposites and to carefully measure the dosage of the one aspect or the other, so as to produce differentiations and nuances in the resulting synthesis. This is a house we built in Fna, in the lower Engadin, for a gallerist. As Raphael said, we have a lot of clients in the art scene. So she's a very client. She always gives us projects again. We do now a house for her in Greece. A form that is perfect in and for itself only establishes a partial contact to other spaces. The opposite, namely an imperfect form, has an effect upon its surroundings precisely due to its non-perfect spatiality. This is why the close marriage between orthogonality and polygonality is so important to us, because it is more true to nature and creates a better feeling of an organically developed urban structure. The Occidental and Eurocentric worldwide decisively shaped by Cartesian rationalism has outlived itself. Both the social and the theoretical parameters in which we live are marked by insecurities and ambiguities. Today's growing complexity and what will presumably be its future exponential increase make the struggles over specific terminology all the more urgent. Dogmatists, be they Palladians or functionalists, tend to hide behind consequential theories that serve as simplification with which to evade the pressing need to confront complexity. Here are some other images about the house of Eva Bressenhuber. You see how we work in models, and you see the close alliance between orthogonality and polygonality. And here you see the materials we often use. It's a very rough concrete, and then Schwerholz, I don't know the name, but probably plywood, yes, of course. is a house we built also for artists in Lenzburg, where I grew up, and it is our cheapest house. It was really very, very low cost, and we just designed in choosing the materials. We didn't cost a lot. And in the inside, it's quite our most opulent space. Also, even the budget is so low, actually with some idealism, very nice spaces to live in. In our projects, we examine quintessentially how the balancing act between apparently irreconcilable extremes can be mastered. On the one hand, this involves deliberately working with the imperfect and the impure, and on the other involves dispensing with any form of historistic or iconic reductionist strategies. We view actively embracing the complexity of architecture to be a challenge, see the manifold meanings of the context to be an enrichment, and are fascinated by formal ambiguity. This is because it is the reflective treatment of contemporary complexity that determines the social elements of architecture. The variables of this architecture is its real and cultural context, its spatial program, its form and architectural expression, as well as its sensual requirements, are all equivalently revised in the design process for as long as it needs for a spatial synthesis to emerge. The combination of utilizing economically efficient structures with haptic sensual surface ultimately enables the realization of low-budget buildings with high-end spatial opulence. In Engelberg, which is looking very small from the outside, but in the inside you have a double-height living room, which is quite impressive actually. In our work, we put particular emphasis on architectural space, which is a clear focus. We see space as the most important material which the architect has to work and reflect on. Following the performative and the iconic turn, to use the common terminology, we could perhaps refer to a spatial term similar to the one discussed in the humanities to address the effects of globalization on the production of space. Evidently, spaces can no longer be the outcome of deconstructivist or absolute spatial thinking. Working with images runs the risk that architecture degenerates into object art. With the disappearance of the old religions and the social transformations of the last 200 years, traditionally established signifiers have become irrelevant. The point is to translate meaning into an abstract, universal language without lapsing in modal rationalism. An architect has to begin with the social anchoring of his or her work. Without this involvement, design is merely l'art pour l'art. Dealing with ethics means quantizing what exists and the reasons beyond it. The tabula rasa mentality of modernism became irrelevant a long time ago. This applies as equally to urban planning as to conversions to new buildings. This is the way to remain autonomous and to avoid being degraded to the role of a service provider. Moreover, ethical behavior doesn't only mean taking actions, but sometimes also refraining from them. I would like to mention the example of Parisian architect Sagot-Thomas, who in a competition for the design of a public square in Bordeaux proposed that absolutely nothing should be changed, and they won the competition. Ethical decisions ultimately determine architectural appearance. It's not inappropriate to draw a comparison with a classical sculpture. I remember how outraged my father was at the proposal to exhibit fascist sculpture Arno Breker in a Zurich gallery. That's when I became aware as a child of the implications of the corrosive influences of fascism on Balzac's sculpture. Namely, sculpture that idealized, that disregarded human scale, and the treated human imperfections as degenerate and not as a part of human existence. The same thing essentially applies in an urban development and in architecture. The greater the scale, the more crucial it becomes to discuss problems like this. So, snapshots of exhibition we did for sculptures of my father, with his early portraits from the 50s and some abstract workings. In the discussion always only if the discussion always only concentrates on the way things are done and not the why, then important questions get overlooked. Whether a piece of art or architecture acquires content and relevance depends, in the last instance, on its social moorings. Irrationality is a part of human nature and is, whether one accepts it or not, equally a part of architecture. Indeed, how we treat irrationality is crucial because it either articulates itself in architectural appearance to awake appeal and feeling, or, for that matter, is so facile as to be unbearable. This is a holiday house we built in Zurich, also a very low budget house. The core of our work revolves around creating living room architecture that meets human needs and excites human responses with calibrated distinctiveness in the built form and manifold visual spatial relations. The starting point of a composition wrote in Sharon is the inner structure of a building project, the inner correlation of the living mechanisms that are to unfold in the building that is to be planned. The spatial mood is articulated by differentiated room heights and by different spatial proportions, linked to the materialization of the color scheme. The aim is to precisely adjust the degree of visual tension in each room and to correlate the individual rooms with each other in a three-dimensional spatial structure. Two images of the inside of that living house. Very scenery like this, panoramic windows where you can sit in and enjoy the view. Is the living room we have in our house in Zurich, where you don't have a double height, but you have the view. So then it's not necessary to have this introverted quality. Living room constitute the focal point, the center of a domestic house. Vertical exaggeration, niches, galleries, openings, or internal or external views can impart a constantly new and specific spatial choreography to them, elevating them to exciting everyday living spaces that are a source of constantly changing inspiration. The light that imparts the specific atmosphere to rooms is of central importance. Architectural contrivances can compensate for drawbacks in lighting techniques and other drawbacks too, to such an extent that the original deficit can ultimately be transformed in spatial advantage. The staircase of the house where it's quite sometimes a Baroque language. Inspiration for this design principle comes from the spatial imagination of the Baroque. whereas that which preceded it tended to conceive of building allegorically and one-dimensionally as a function of belief. The Baroque is predicated on a multilateral relationship between man and space. But we also owe a depth in design terms to the urban and architectural concepts of the Middle East, especially its urban structure with their labyrinthine alleyways and the corresponding domestic buildings with their meticulous and traditionally evolved gradation between private and public spheres. Regardless of the cultural and social undertones associated with them, the domestic houses of the Middle East possesses spatial qualities that possibly served Adolf Loos as an inspiration for his spatial plan, and which equally have a particular allure for us. Gender relations in these regions have led to a spatial interweaving and to visual connections in the domestic dwellings that allow women, at least as observers, to take part in social activities. This is a new house we finished last year. It's a house in Küsnacht. It's a house for a privileged person. It's Barbara Cook's quite known manager. She works for Siemens, and she chooses us to make her a house which has the flair of Japanese architecture, because the place she grew up in a house that we pulled down, and we had to reconstruct the garden like it was before, in a very Japanese manner. We use the privileged framework that our clients, not only the private but also the public ones, provide us with in order to exercise the core discipline of our profession, namely in each proposal to undertake an investigation of the specific architectural space in question in order to synthesize new building forms. The fact that the majority of these projects originate with clients who, like ourselves, are at home in the world of art and architecture gives additional inputs to this inquiry. Equally, the ever greater interconnectedness of the individual in today's world does also result in a counter-reaction in a yearning for direct, singular experience and for housing and living space that meets those human needs that are locally fixed. Thinking, talking, cooking, eating, bathing, showering, sleeping, and so on. See which this can inspire you. This is sliding doors of the Villa Katsura. It inspired us to do the kitchen in quite extravagant way. Here you see me and the dean of the School of Architecture in Ahmedabad with another architect discussing in a very nice context. Cultural consciousness is an essential part of architectural craft and means, as Wittgenstein expressed it, working on the perception of how one sees things. In the last instance, it is this reflexive effort that determines the social relevance of architecture, in as much as even in the cases when it explicitly renounces it, architecture always relates to social reality. This is why it is important to us to be able to adopt varying viewpoints and to adjust the gate between them. Architecture is socially relevant when it commits infractions and effectively exploits frictions for its own ends. It is only through the conjunctions of empiricisms and theory of utopia and practical propositions that social relevance becomes really evident. This is why for us transcending boundaries is both a matter of course and sine qua non. By its nature, architecture spans various disciplines, being a medium that avails itself of the different materials and the expertise of a wide range of specialists, from engineer, carpenter, and urban planners to the philosopher. To then synthesize, spatially translate, and incorporate them into a whole. The individual components have to be selected, equivalently handled, and amalgamated into a new synthesis. Here you see 4 pictures of our journeys we did with our students during the when we were teaching at the ETH. First one is in Cairo, you see that. The other one is in Japan, in front of a temple, and the other one, two are in India, near Ahmedabad. I think it's also important to experience poverty, not, I don't mean it cynical, but it's part of our planet. And then the other one is also in India, a very wealthy family. So it was very interesting to go with students and make them experience different sides of our existence. This broad cultural curiosity creates a form of silent knowledge, extended through the intuition acquired by processing experiences, and accordingly refines an ability to make quick and coherent architectural judgments. An interest in the paradigmatic social and cultural changes that are mirrored in art and life helps to preserve a sense of impartiality and feeds an eagerness to discover correlations, whilst a preoccupation with global contexts engenders differentiated local responses. The term mondialité, which represents an important leitmotif for us, stands for a form of global dialogue which, instead of erasing differences through homogeneity, comprehends variety as a richness and nurtures it. In a lecture Alvar Aalto delivered to the Royal Institute of British Architects in May 1957, he spoke of the erroneous concept of rationalism, the erroneous use of the term economical, and the erroneous application of the term ornament. For him, these were the trois cochons, which always manifested themselves together, and he mentioned the long rows of buildings he had seen in Switzerland, built to a completely spiritless mechanical standard, but exhibiting extremely ingenious ornamentation. The ornamentation served to mask things that would otherwise appear too severe and inhuman. Aalto's struggles against an ever more culturalist society and for a humanization of architecture continues to serve as a leitmotif for us and has become more essential than ever. Aalto's call that without art life becomes mechanical and dies is as relevant as ever, and we have the modest hope that something of legacy echoes in our world. Here you see the hotel, the bar, the Castel in Swartz, which Raphael mentioned in his introduction. And of course this bar has the theme of the sensuousness, and also it's about the effect alcohol has on the human being in relaxing, and the Pipilotti Richt's video installation is part of the shelf of the bottles, and she projects videos from behind on these bottles, and only 3 bottles have vivid etiquettes. the other hand, our interest in and familiarity with conceptual art forms and ideal background to sound out areas of perception and requirement. But it is equally important to address both the limits of art and the limits of architecture in order to counteract against superficial formalism. Its cultural identity, which is the last resort, is richly nurtured, which remains decisive and which helps to prevent a global formal leveling. This means that the universal aspects of architecture equally require an overlay of atmospheric feeling that is characterized by the region. Here an example of a conversion we did in Zurich, the Kunsthalle Zurich. It was a collaboration with concept artists from Norway and Denmark. And the project was that the whole exhibition was the conversion. And we just did idealize the process of the construction in taking away all the tickets and stickers, so it was kind of aestheticizing the process. It was quite an interesting experience to see the process of building as a very aesthetic thing. It was quite successful for the visitors. This is another conversion we did in Gstaad, just an example that we work very close with artists. This is a swimming pool where minimal artists all did this wall, this painted wall, and I think it's not really typical for him, but a very nice, discreet work with this liquid painting, which is also reflecting light very nicely. This is the last project I show you. This is a reconstruction we did in Arles in France, and it's also important for us to do conversions because all these themes I mentioned are even more crucial when you work with such a delicate object, because the house, it was a bishop's house 200 years ago, and it's very close to the cathedral, and we had really a huge respect to do that. And you see here that is a very wealthy person, and he also can work with quite precious materials. It was also a pleasure to do that. But it has still that expression which is quite humble and discreet. Here you see the courtyard where we tried with the formal language to take the language which is there, take the same elements in the new design so that it looks like it has ever been there. We are continually preoccupied with the dialectic process of design, with the conflict between concept and context. Instead of ending in a static state, this process between reality and ideas often results in each singular case in the formulation of a new and exact balance, an equilibrium in Jean Baudrillard's sense of other space, and an inspiration that runs contrary to any project and any functional dictates. This expresses the fact that it is not the perfect thing of a conceptual program that is at stake, but rather the way of living that takes place within a particular architecture, or the molding of architectural space to focus on sensuous and practical needs. and which therefore explicitly elevates experience non-perfection and not build dogma to its program. The more the contextual influence is minimized, the closer a building comes to being a piece of art that agitates fully divorced from the usual practical constraints of architecture. This can indeed prove fascinating, but will, however, sooner or later undoubtedly be at the occupant's expense. We consider the conflict between concept and context, be it real or cultural, to be the essence of the design process. The oscillation between theoretical considerations tied to a permanent sharpening of sensory perceptions via the surroundings and a relaxed attunement to life remains a venturous and highly demanding balancing act that needs to be permanently mastered, and which Denise Scott Brown expressed in her aphorism, "The architect who cares not at all for context is a boor. The one who cares only for context is a boor." We see our role as to enliven the site, to invigorate the context, to impart a dynamic to the structure, and this based in such a way on the current and the actual that the contextual present and the presence of the architecture created by us influence the history of the site. Thank you very much for your attention.